Okay, welcome everybody to number 124 of the Circle of Wine Writers Let's Talk series. Today's topic is let's talk about challenges in France with Olivier Humbrecht, Master of Wine, Fabien Moreau and Gavin, Quinney. I'd like to extend a welcome to the members that haven't attended these sessions before, although there's not very many of you now. Now we're into our over 100 sessions, but also to those people who are not members and also joining for the first time. The Circle of Wine Writers was founded in 1960 in the UK and today has over 270 members, including wine writers, educators, broadcasters, photographers, and other professional communicators. Membership is now 50-50 in the UK and overseas, and there's now more information about the Circle on our website. And if you'd like any more details about how to join, then the details are there too. I'd now like to hand over to Helen Savage, who will be introducing our presenters today.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'm Helen. I'm the membership secretary of the Circle and a member of the Association of Wine Educators, and we've got folk from both groups. It's great to see you all, lots of familiar faces. We're going to be talking, as Andrea says, about challenges in France, and there are many of them. First of all, obviously, climate change. The latest news is that the harvest here in France, I'm speaking from France myself, has been rather better than last year, but last year in many places was an absolute disaster. It's still 13%, the latest figures suggest, below the average of the last 5 years. In some parts, it's been hugely successful. I was talking to Michel Drapier last week, and he's thrilled, says one of the best vintages in 50 years. But Beaujolais, for example, has a tiny harvest down to the same level they had in 2012. So we have very, very strange things happening with climate change and very unpredictable weather patterns. Well, guests will tell us much more about that. And inevitably, that reflects on the kinds of wines that are being made here, with many different changes of style and different possibilities, and some things that were traditional in the past no longer possible. And then there's the obvious economic climate in which we're doing things, not just Trump's tariffs, but we were just talking before everybody joined us about the offers that Lidl are making here in France, which have caused outrage in some sectors, with, for example, a Vieille Vigne Côte du Rhône selling at €1.89. And Gérard Boncion, who is the president of the Confederation of Wine Growers in the IGP areas of France, says this is a betrayal of the profession. It's disgusting to profit, he says, from the distress of the sector. So that's a little bit of the background, and our three distinguished guests are going to be telling you lots more. We're going to go Alsace, Bordeaux, and Chablis in that order. First with Olivier Humbrecht, who is an agronomist and enologist, and the first French person to become a Master of Wine back in 1989 while he was working for Sopexa. The same year, he moved back to France, to Alsace, to run the family estate. Wonderful, wonderful estate, as some members of AWE who are here today can verify, who were there together in March. And he's overseen many changes at the estate, including the particularly significant one of the movement to make it biodynamic. And then Gavin Quinney, who is the owner of Chateau Beauduc, along with his wife Angela in the Entre-deux-Mers, who does far more than just producing fine wine. He publishes detailed vintage reports on Jancis Robinson's site LiveX and his own website, and tastes all the top wines for an annual report for Harper's. And then finally, but not least, Fabien Moreau, who is the sixth generation of his family to make wines in Chablis. He has experience of working in New Zealand. He returned to the Yonne in 2001 and also saw many changes in the estate, Christian Moreau, Père et Fils, which included in 2013 organic accreditation. Enough from me. Over, please, first to our very distinguished first guest, Olivier Humbrecht. Olivier, it's yours.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, like Helen just said, we're all still in harvest. We are actually finishing probably tomorrow. As you can see on my face, I get the sunshine. It's nice weather now. 25 is going to be the smallest harvest in Alsace of the past 15 years, according to the current statistics we can see, mostly due to a bad fruit set after flowering. As you know, France experienced, especially our region, a very long, hot and dry period from early June to basically middle of July that caused the usual drought issues with potential hydric stress in young vines and also some soils, mostly valley floor, sandy soils. Then it was much cooler from mid-July to the 10th of August, precisely. A little bit of rain, the vine turned green again. It was a really nice period. Obviously, after the hot weather in June, July, the risk of disease was very low in our region. That's a good thing for 25. And then it was the scorching 2 weeks of canicule, as we say. Some villages, many places in France, beat their hottest temperature ever recorded, going to 43 Celsius in some parts of the south of France. Alsace wasn't so hot. We peaked at 37, so not as hot as 23, 15, and 20, but it was still quite warm. Luckily, the vines had enough water resource at that point, and it was only 2 weeks, so the damage were very little. What became problematic is just basically before the start of the harvest, we had in the past 30 days, I just looked, between 120 and 187 millimeters of rain in the past 30 days, which is always annoying. That if that rain would have been much better used if it arrived 2, 3, or 4 weeks earlier, obviously. We're happy with the crop. The quality is excellent. The acidity are very good. We just have to jungle between the different rainfalls to be able to pick our grapes dry, which is not fun in this current situation where we always struggle to find harvesters and a team big enough. So just to give an example, we harvested last Sunday, we were 100 people into the vineyards. And in France, you almost considered as being outlaw when you do this, you know. But anyway, the grapes are in and we're happy. So I will speak, of course, of climate change. So I'm going to share very quickly a little PowerPoint, so I am not forgetting anything. So these data are about 4 or 5 years old and were produced by the local INRAE in Colmar. And they reason in terms of progression. So as you can see here, the main data, basically we are today 3-4 weeks earlier than if you compare to the beginning of the climate change in the 80s. Bud break is every 10 years, 4.4 days earlier, flowering 5 days, and harvest 7.6 days earlier. For those who know the indice de Huglin, yes?
We can't see your screen.
Oh, okay. Am I the only one to see it? Okay, sorry. I thought I did share it, but maybe I did. Okay, give me just a little second. Must have pushed the wrong button. I was the only one seeing it. Okay, now it's open here. I can go back here and I should. So, can you see it now?
Yes, just have to push the full screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
So here are the data, and for those who know the indice de Huglin, it's Huglin used to be a researcher in Alsace back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and he calculated index based on the amount of temperature added during the growing season to the end of the harvest, saying that a vine starts to do something if the temperature is above 10 Celsius. So now we've just reached roughly 2,000 indice de Huglin. Back in the 60s when it started, Alsace had 1,200, just to give you an idea. And the 2,000 today is what Bordeaux had 30, 40 years ago. Okay, it shows you the development. What is really, really interesting is to see that every 10 years, the region gets 0.5 Celsius warmer, which is kind of standard today around the world. 5 degrees Celsius on a century. But what is really more important to us is during the maturation period, August, September, it's 1.4 Celsius we gain every 10 years. And that is absolutely massive. And that's why maybe we only gain 4 or 5 days earlier for bud break and flowering, but it makes the harvest even earlier. The rainfall doesn't change. Definitely 24, 25, we didn't see any drop in rainfall, but the average in Colmar is always 500 millimeter. That makes Colmar the driest city in town in France. But what is very significant is the deficit of evapotranspiration is calculated of about 200 millimeters since the 1970s, or a progression of 38 millimeters every 10 years. That means that if we want to keep up with the increased temperature, we should get 38 millimeters more rain every 10 years, which we don't, and that creates the deficit. It's easy to understand. It gets warmer, the vines are more thirsty, and that water doesn't arrive, at least not every year. So what are the consequences of, if I look at the negative consequence of climate change? It is always not everything is bad or good. Definitely increase of spring frost, something that we never experienced in the past. When the vine starts to grow end of March, like this year, for example, in April, we face high risks of frost. Happened very severely in 21 and 17 in recent vintages. In 17, some estate lost 60-65% of the crop due to the spring frost. Much more severe drought issues in summer and during the maturation period. We were almost really critical middle of July this year if the weather hadn't changed to much cooler temperature with some rains. It was really, really very difficult. Acidity. Acidification is now standard. People don't have to ask for permission to do it for the past few years. So anybody can acidify up to 3.5 grams per liter of tartaric acid. For people who know vinification, it's a huge amount of acid you're allowed to add in the grapes. And that's now totally standard for most producers. We also have a definite increase of cryptogamic disease, mostly powdery mildew. That was not so much active in Alsace in the past. So more issues, more spraying programs, and so on. That's also, if it's warmer, you get more mushrooms. It's easy to understand. Photosynthesis, well, more sunshine, more heat, too much alcohol. That can also be an issue. And the maturation time can be shorter in vintages where we have accumulation of enough water, lots of sunshine, and lots of heat. This happened in 2022, for example, in recent vintages. And earlier harvest. So the production of sweet wine is more difficult. It's something that most people don't realize, but to make a great sweet wine in Alsace, you need a little bit of botrytis, noble rot to develop. In a day like today, when it's warm and humid, you get a lot of rot developing if you're not careful. But this rot can turn out into sour rot extremely quickly. So sweet wine's quality nowadays is compromised for me in the region. Is it a problem? Maybe not, because who drinks sweet wine nowadays? So I don't consider it to be really a real issue. So what are the positives in the climate change? Well, sorry, guys, in Bordeaux, Merlot was ripe in Alsace about 25 years ago. Cabernet Sauvignon is okay today. We're experimenting with Syrah and Grenache in Alsace. We planted Sangiovese, Chacarel, the Corsican grapes, and they ripened very, very well. We picked our experimental vineyard of Syrah about 10 days ago. Absolutely perfect ripeness if it's planted on a granitic geology. Limestone is still a bit too cold. Photosynthesis is more alcohol, yeah, but I just want to remind you that in Alsace, the average ripeness of Riesling in the 70s was 8.5% alcohol. The chaptalization was massive, lots of malic acid in the wine, and the Riesling were very, very green. And that's probably why people were not really keen in drinking Riesling back then. Today, Riesling is a much more popular grape variety, probably because more vineyard today can achieve a proper ripeness for Riesling. So yes, there is still a great future for Riesling in our region and more good ones. Acidity, INRA estimate a drop of 1.2 grams expressed in sulfuric acid. That's roughly 1.8 grams in tartric acid every 10 years. So desacidification is not necessary anymore. We're talking about adding acid before. People can ask themselves what is worse to do to a wine, removing the acid or adding tartric acid. You know, in terms of oenology practice, a lot of people prefer to add some tartric acid than having to remove a lot of acidity from the wine. Earlier harvest means less rot problems, better fermentation, more wild yeast on the grape. So there are a lot of advantages to harvest under a nice day like today than harvesting end of October and November when it's cold and rainy, everything. So yes, it's easier to make drier wines today in Alsace. This is just to show you the 20 or odd years with the evapotranspiration, the highest, the last 10 or 15 highest in terms of rainfall, average temperature. And the average temperature, yes, 25 is the hottest year we had since the record started in 1976. Okay, there's no people experience that. But you can see that among the hottest years, a lot of them are in the past 10 years, you see. You don't find many years starting with 1.9 in the hottest years in that average temperature. Rainfall is more erratic. So this data was done before the rain started 30 days ago. The data was done around the middle of August. Probably the number would change now, obviously. And the more interesting for me is the amount of water the vine needs, ETP, evapotranspiration potential. And it shows you that it's really in the last vintages that the vines needed more water to face the climate change, water that we don't have. So if the average rainfall is 500 millimeters and the vine needs 657, you can see there is a huge deficit. This is more of a general thing I put down. What's happening in Alsace? Well, Alsace, as probably most of you know, is probably the greenest AOC, AOP in France, and I'm very proud of that. Today, 37% of the vineyards are cultivated organic. I can't tell you how much is biodynamic, but probably a good part of it. This is very important. I don't know if you read some news in France, but there was a huge study that was just put on the news yesterday that people who live within 200 meters from vineyards have 10 times, 20 times more chemicals in their hair, in their body, in their urine, in what they eat and everything. And I can really see today a huge societal pressure on wine growers to reduce the level of product we use. That includes also copper and sulfur that we use organically. And that's going to be a problem for wine growers in the future in a very inhabited surrounding. Alsace is now experimenting with a lot of new grape varieties that also include those resistant grapes. So you find a lot of growers today playing with more red grapes, not so much white, but mostly red. Pinot Noir is developing hugely in our region. It went from like a few percent 50 years ago to today being not far the third, going to be the second most planted grape variety in our region. There is a huge development of natural wine in the region that includes orange, maceration, no additives, and all these kind of things. And it's probably a reaction to younger generation who are trying to experiment something else that sounds cooler, that is different from what their parents or grandparents are drinking with food at the table. It's things you see a lot wine bar. Colmar is only a 60,000 town with the population. And it's probably a 12 wine bar, and all of them are serving a huge selection of this kind of wine. And they do attract a very large audience of very young wine drinker. It's not my favorite wines, but if it makes people drink wine instead of other things, I'm happy, if you know what I mean. And I think it's maybe one way to reacquire interest from the latest generation into drinking something made from grapes and not something made from chemicals or sugar or cocktail or something like that.
Just 1 or 2 minutes more, please, Olivier.
The generation of wine growers in Alsace, as I say, the number of estates is dropping down. It's today 750 estates that produce wine and sell wine, bottle wine and sell wine. We were over 2,050 years ago. From 2000 to 750, it shows that a lot of smaller wine growers have disappeared, and the one staying back gets bigger and bigger. That is a real problem in our region. Less wine grower means less ambassadors to speak about the wine, and larger négociant co-op being really huge. The 10 biggest producers in Alsace produce 50% of the wine from the region. That is absolutely massive. But then there is also a dynamic young generation of wine growers. I just show you the kind of work they do. This is now a cut from the map just from our region. They identify all the single vineyard there. You can go and find this, which is something that was done by this young generation of wine growers. And I think it's delimitation for some of them is not official, but it's a start to show that the younger generation are really terroir driven, much more than their elders in the past. The classification of Premier Cru has finally started. After 20 years of battle with INAO. It will still take another few years. Things are very slow, but now the commission is coming regularly, and we have the first 7 vineyards being isolated for study. The bottle shape, things are changing in Alsace, and probably will acquire different things, like, for example, using kegs, using different materials, not just the Alsace flute and things like that. The mentality are changing. Something we could never speak about in Alsace. Everybody wanted the traditional flute. And also the obligation to bottle the wine in the 114 villages in Alsace is probably also going to fall down in the next few years. So I don't know if it's a good thing or not to ship a tank of wine to, I don't know, London to bottle Alsace wine in London. But if it makes wine sell and more portable, why not? Evolution of wine style. Yes, Riesling laws. Riesling has to be dry in Alsace, or you're not allowed to call it Riesling anymore. And this is probably going to happen also with some other grapes that should be always dry, like Pinot Blanc, Auxerrois, this kind of wines. And lastly, with the recent, and that probably be my transition to the next speakers, irrigation. Alsace is allowed to irrigate. It's been voted by the parliament, and irrigation is legal today in Alsace. But if you want to speak about irrigation in my region, I'm happy to answer questions later, because that's a vast debate. But irrigation is now legal in Alsace. Yeah.
Olivier, thank you so much. That was a fantastic tour de force. We move quickly on, please. Can you stop sharing your screen? And we'll move quickly on to Gavin. Gavin, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Helen. Gosh, that was quite in depth, Olivier, and I concur. Obviously, a lot of the issues in Bordeaux don't relate to some of the things that you talked about on the last slide, but certainly in terms of climate change, the negatives and positives, those were really interesting. So I've got quite, as you said, Helen, I do quite a bit of stuff on Jancis's site and LiveX site and Harper's. And I often do go into quite a lot of detail, and I'm afraid I'm going to go into quite a lot of detail here. So I'm going to flip over to really some of some slides sort of highlighting the challenges for Bordeaux, which was the original sort of brief, really. What are the major issues, the major challenges? So I'm going to share now my screen, if that's all right. I'm going to go to content only, because we tried with me having like a little talking head in the corner, but it cut out a lot of the details. So I'm just going to share that. 1 second. And then I'll go to play. 1 second. So I've called it Bordeaux's Imperfect Storm. That's actually a picture at the end of August from our top floor, showing storm clouds. Actually, we've had very little rain, as we discussed just before this session. We've had about 30 millimeters of rain since the end of August. But you can see the storm clouds overhead with fairly healthy vines and very sort of dried out, rather sunburnt grass, as you can see. So and that's at Chateau. This is where I am currently, sitting actually in our farmhouse, because we were harvesting Merlot today, and it's just next to the winery. So I'm sitting in our farmhouse, which is looking rather gloomy behind me. But so we're just south of the dynamic market town of Crayon, about 25 minutes from Bordeaux, and about half an hour from Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, set amongst the vast Bordeaux wine region that you see before you. So I was quite interested by, I was quoted in the FT by Jancis in her very fine article, which is actually free to view on her website. A longer version is free to view on her website, which talked about the Chateau Lafleur decision to move out of the Pomerol appellation and go Vin de France, which was quite a bombshell for a lot of people here. But I did like the way that she, having spoken about Le Pin, Petrus, and then Lafleur in the paragraph above, I then get a mention in being in Bordeaux's less glamorous Entre-deux-Mers region, which is certainly true. But he is also a prolific reporter on the whole Bordeaux wine scene. And actually, she does a link from her website on that particular comment. And I see I've written 140. Well, there's 140 mentions that I get in on her website. So I've done an awful lot of in-depth harvest and crop reports and other such tedious stuff, which you can enjoy on her website. We've been at, this is our 27th harvest at Chateau, and we've had a good couple of years, and we were able eventually to afford a new roof. So I thought I'd just show that. This is my wife Angela, who is with 3 of our 4 grown-up children now, harvesting in mid-August, on the 19th of August, which was certainly not in their holiday plans, that's for sure. And my job is obviously to count the bunches. Actually, a very good crop for our Cremant. This was a vineyard that we planted for Cremant 20 years ago. So, and a good crop this year. And that I'm with Daniel, our vineyard manager, and Nelly, and we've worked together all those 27 harvests, which is quite something. I just wanted to touch on these things really in terms of challenges for Bordeaux. Demand and supply is obviously a big feature for Bordeaux, a rather lack of demand and oversupply at times. Vintages and the climate, as we talked about, lower yields, which is a major issue in the last 10 years. The top versus the bottom, I think people get confused about the top wines. Obviously, en primeur is an issue. Maybe 2025 will be a chance to resurrect the fortunes of en primeur, maybe not. And then it's a very different scene at the bottom of the pyramid, as it were. I mentioned Chateau Lafleur quitting the AOC, and there is, I think, some good news, which I'll finish up with. So just skipping through, here's some tasty data. Now, I actually put this, we harvested today, but I woke up very early in the morning to put this slide together because I thought it was so exciting, talking about the last 25 years or so of Bordeaux exports. Because it's now a major issue. Now, it's worth pointing out that less than 50% of Bordeaux sales are export. The majority is still in France. But in terms of demand, we saw a massive leap, really, certainly in the value. The thin blue line is the value, whereas the bar charts are the volume. But we saw a massive leap from China, which is now abating. But still, the biggest export markets are the USA and China. And then there's some of the more traditional markets, European markets and so on, following on. But we've seen a real drop off in the last few years there. So, from 2021, so in terms of value and in volume, and that's certainly a big challenge. And of course, there's been mention of Trump tariffs and all sorts of stuff, but exports are a challenge, as is, of course, the domestic market, without a doubt. I will say that I'll publish all these on my website on gavinquinney.com because I think there's some useful data there if people wanted to look at it. So I'll hopefully publish that tomorrow. But in keeping with the decline in demand, the supply has gone downhill as well. So, which is no bad thing. And when we came here in '99, I mean, it was really quite incredible to think that, say, in the early years of the 2000s, in the noughties, that Bordeaux was making 600 million litres of wine a year. If you ask people how much wine, the average wine consumer, visitors here, if I ask them how much wine is produced in Bordeaux, people think, 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, maybe even 100 million. But back then there was, that's in terms of bottles. And back then the average was 800 million bottles a year. Even now, dropping right down to the average now, it's still 500 million litres of wine, most of which is red, 80 odd percent red. And that's still far too much. And as we shall see, but we're seeing the vineyard decreasing, and we're seeing yields, that blue line, the yields per hectare are going down, making it pretty extremely uneconomic. And if we compare those yields, this is a box. So on the top left there, in recent years, the sort of the pink are the low yields, the smaller crop years. Obviously 17 with the frost, and then we had 13 and so on. But if you look back to the early 2000s, and even quite recently, as sort of 10 years ago to 2016, which was the last really decent crop, I mean, the yields were much higher. Obviously, the total production was huge, but the yields were much higher. And I think we could sort of, Olivier's touched on it, but here's just a sort of idea of the last decade. I think 2016, my feeling, having lived through all these harvests, all these vintages, is that 2016 was probably the last sort of normal year in terms of a good crop, nice, spring rains, nothing too damaging, and then a fine summer. And if I did cut out of this some of the weather charts, which you can find on my website and on Jancis each harvest. But 2016, I do remember we had a big douse after a very dry summer, lovely summer, not too hot. A lovely dousing of heavy rain on the evening of September the 13th, and that was in many cases several weeks before the harvest. So the end of September, early October was the harvest of the reds of 2016, producing fantastic wines. But September the 13th is pretty much the end of the Merlot harvest for a lot of people. So that was really almost the last quite standard classical vintage. Of course, we have the solar vintages, and maybe you could say 19 was a classic vintage, possibly even 20. But certainly at 2018, early mildew pressure for sure was a very warm, hot summer. But these vintages, the solar vintages there in the orange, very much punctuated with extreme heat waves now. I mean, to get 40 degrees in June is quite common now. And of course, with extremes of climate, quite soon after you can get hailstorms and so on and so forth. But we've definitely had, Olivier mentioned sort of canicule and we've had sécheresse and very dry, hot summers, especially 22 and again in 2025. But many people would consider those to be great vintages, and I would certainly say that 18, 19, and 20, there are some fantastic wines from those vintages. 22's, it's still young and in the bottle, but many critics really love 22, and I think they will love 25 as well. Then, but in many cases, lower yields. Certainly 18, from chateau to chateau, top estates, some made very small yields. 19, reasonably solid yields, but elsewhere tricky. Likewise, mildew pressure in 21, 23, and 24. With our oceanic climate here, I think we're seeing the mildew pressure, both for organic and conventional growers, has been extreme, and certainly 24 a very small crop, but 23 was very difficult. We managed to fend it off. 21 had, there was a lot of potential mildew risk, and a lot of people suffered from that. So again, lower yields as a result of that. And then 2017, the famous late April frost, which people were not really, I think, really not prepared for, because as many of you will know, the great frost before that was back in 1991, so before my time in Bordeaux anyway. But again, so not low yields everywhere in 2017. Some people make that mistake. But for example, in Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac and Saint-Julien, they had pretty good yields, very, very good yields, because they were not so affected because of the nature of their vineyards next to the lovely Gironde estuary. So lots of reasons for low yields there. I think we should bear in mind, I mentioned about the top v the bottom, and I think most of you will be aware, but a lot of people think of Bordeaux as being just the Grand Vin, the expensive wines, the famous names, and all the talk of prices and en primeur and so on and so forth. But of course, the vast majority of Bordeaux is generic Bordeaux and the Côte. And so that's at least half. And the Grand Cru, quite often when I do these reports, I see that really the top wines are sort of 10% of the volume or less, often quite a lot less. I think what's interesting on there, though, actually, Crémant de Bordeaux is sneaked up. I think that's a bit of good news. 2024, for example, was 4 times the amount made in 2021. And just on that, in terms of climate, I mentioned that we were picking there for our Crémant on the 19th of August. Well, the Crémant that we're selling now, which is really good, but we started picking for that on the 13th of September. So it's a challenge, as Olivier mentioned, with 100 people in his vineyard on a Sunday. It's quite tricky around here getting people in Bordeaux to pick Crémant, which has to be picked by law by hand. So Crémant is encouraging. So it's good to have them that wine feature. It's a small blip, but it's a very positive step. And as you can see there, 80% Bordeaux red. That's actually quite a low figure for Bordeaux red. Usually it's a bit higher than that. For my money, there's far too much red being produced in Bordeaux, I'm sorry to say, but less than 5% rosé, about 10% dry white, less this year, I would suspect, because it's a low yield for a lot of dry whites, including our Sauvignon. And then sweet white usually makes up about 1% of the total. It's worth then pointing out there's been a lot of, I'm sure many of you are aware of the vine pool schemes and the number of hectares under vine in Bordeaux reducing quite dramatically. And I think so from 2020, from memory, about 110,000 hectares. I would think in 2025 we'll slip below 90,000 hectares of Appellation Bordeaux vineyards. So quite a dramatic drop. Some of that has come from vine pool schemes through getting grants for ripping up vines, but an awful lot of the reduction is down to abandoned vines, and for me that's a massive problem also in terms of the risk of mildew and so on and so forth. So abandoned vines I don't think being handled particularly well by the authorities here, but this map which was in my last year's crop and weather report, which shows that really it's in the cheap seats rather than the Royal Circle in terms of vines being pulled out. So of course they're not being pulled out in Pomerol or Saint-Julien or Margaux in terms of reducing the crop size there. It's really sort of quite big blobs around us, actually. It's a feature I live with.
A couple more minutes, please, Gavin.
That's it. And there we have some vines being pulled out. Now, this is actually Château Lafleur in Pomerol, a few days after they announced that they were leaving the appellation. And almost I knew they wouldn't be, but I sort of thought, I wonder if the vines really are a bit dried out. But I think we can see there that the vines look pretty healthy. But the announcement by Chateau Lafleur, I think if you're not familiar with it, I would suggest reading that article written by Jancis on her website. It takes you through the detail of them announcing why they're leaving. I would say primarily it's to do with irrigation in terms of quitting the appellation for Vin de France, not just for Lafleur, but there are other vineyards as well, like Grand Village, and there are other properties. And there we have some nice, healthy vines at Lafleur. I must say they look pretty good. When you drive around, by the way, you might get an impression from this hot dry vintage that there's lots of withered vines, but actually there are, of course, younger vines on very gravelly, sandy soils. Of course, a lot of them have suffered, but there are some incredibly healthy-looking vines all around Bordeaux, from Pauillac through, the Medoc and across to Saint-Emilion-Pomerol. And I think in terms of the good news, I do think 2025 is going to be a fantastic vintage. I can't say whether the En Primeur campaign will be amazing, but I think it'll be certainly worth tasting the wines. I don't think we can ever give up the En Primeur tastings. Whether people will be interested in buying them, that will depend on so many factors. The other bit of good news is, as I sort of talked about a little bit, we have had, I think, a string of amazing vintages. Of course, moving on from 9 and 10 and, very good vintages like 2014 in the Northern Medoc especially, but 16, 18, 19, 20, potentially 22. And even, I think, 17 and 21, 23 and 24 are not disastrous by any means. The most recent fairly disastrous was 2013, apart from Sauternes, which made fantastic wines there. But there is really good levels of stock still in the system, whether they're sitting at the chateaus or negociants or elsewhere. There's an awful lot of fantastic wines and some incredible values. I mean, just to pick one, the Wine Society last week mailed out saying they've got Chateau Cisac 2018 for £16 a bottle. When you consider, and you can have delivery free for one bottle at the Wine Society, which is interesting. But when you consider £6 of that is UK duty and tax, and then the cost of shipping and the cost of delivery for 16 quid, I think that's a pretty good deal. Hopefully I'm not going to poo-poo Cisac's chances of selling much En Primeur next year. But I think there's some fantastic wines in the system. So I think for consumers and for critics to write up about, I think there's some fantastic value to be had. So,
Gavin, thank you very much indeed. That's marvellous. Some wonderful things to think about there. Do please put your questions up if we have a little bit of time at the end. But I'd like to move as quickly as possible now, please, to you, Fabien, to Chablis and what's happening there. If you can please stop the screen share, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a huge PowerPoint. It will be just my face most of the time. Anyway, but yeah, so about Chablis, maybe let's say starting with the climate change, how it's moving in Chablis. So, Chablis, that's really the far north of Burgundy, always cooler than the rest of Burgundy, and it's not changing a lot. But what we see, which is crazy, I'm the 6th generation of the family making wine in Chablis, but so it's almost the 21 vintage, 22 vintage I manage at the estate with my father. But in 20 years, it's crazy how it's changed. So even in such small year, because 20 years, it's nothing when you're expecting Chablis wine starts during the Rhône, during in Moyen-Âge and develop a lot. But it's crazy how in 20 years it changed. And first, climate change in Chablis means, first, regarding just the frost problem. In Chablis, we had always frost problem. It's not like Olivier said, in Alsace, there are lots of problems there. But for us, it was always an issue. And the key of the development of the Chablis vineyard was the appearance of the frost protection with gas, with fuel, with aeolian and now electric wire. Now it's changing, and this arriving, it admits to people develop the vineyards during the 60s and 70s. But now we still have frost almost every year, certain region, but it's completely, it's not anymore the same frost. When I arrived in Chablis in 2000 with the 2002 vintage, the first 5 years, 6 years, the frost was middle of May during until the time people say the sunglass 10 ice scent, and when you have shoots, quite high shoot, but it's not really the case. You have always see the temperatures going down during this period. But now we have first early April, the first week of April, the 2nd of April. But 20 years ago, 30 years ago, early the first week of April, we didn't have the bud break, so it was not a problem to have frost at this time. But now the vines going out during this period, we have shoots at the bud breaks, at 1 leaf or 2 leaves. So that's a huge change, and how we manage to change the frost protection, and that's why we use more and more, when we could, electric wire, because electric wire could work when you have 2-3 leaves. When you have shoots of 30 centimeters, what we used to have during the first period, it doesn't work. So it's first change. We still have frost, but it's completely different frost. After, in terms of date of harvest, of course, we are picking more and more often in August. Now it's the first time in 22 vintage we pick in August. For us, not this year, because we start the 3rd of September, but it's almost the same. People start in Chablis the 26th, 27th August. But it's more and more earlier, and also a big change compared to the rest of our friend of Côte de Nuit and Côte de Beaune. My grandfather or father always, at this time, we always start 10, 15 days after the Côte de Beaune. Now we start almost the same times. It's quite surprising, and sometimes we start before the Côte de Beaune. So it's a bit faster, so that's a big change also. Date of picking. After the maturity, of course, the maturity changed a lot in Chablis. We move more, we have more and more maturity, and also Olivier talked about chaptalization. Yeah, in Chablis also, it was every year chaptalization. I remember when I was children, it was a nice game to make a big cake with all the sugar. But now, and I had the maturity control of my grandfather during the 70s. It's crazy because he harvests all the Grand Cru at 10 degrees, natural 10, 10.5, and now harvesting a Grand Cru in Chablis under 12 degrees, natural sugar. It's almost impossible. Some people arrive to do that, but it's another story. But normally, now it's crazy. You have more and more maturity. But that's maybe a good good thing for Chablis, because before people think about minerality in Chablis, it was more green and unripe grapes. And now most of the people reach a good maturity, whatever, how they do the farming, organic or not, and most are not organic. But that's a good side of the warming in Chablis, that people most of the time reach a good level of maturity, if we want. After, in terms of maybe of the weather you don't really feel for me a huge change, but what's happened, it's always changing. You have a day at 30 degrees, 1 week after you have 10 degrees, you have nice weather, and you have 100 millimeters of rain in one day. That's a big change, and that's the vine that. And us in the vineyard also, it's not easy to manage, especially with organic farming. In Chablis, it's still quite tough some year, like last year. Last year was a good example of the limit of organic farming. We had just rain during 3 months, and even without organic farming, people had problems. But for us, it was very tough. Impossible to spray, impossible to go in the vineyard, even with chenille or whatever you want. It was a limit really, and because the total of rainfall of 24 was not huge, but it was at the same period, and that's not easy. Also, in 20 years, the change I saw at the domain, when I arrived, I will say, well, okay, we moved to organic farming, first vineyard in 2005. And I changed also a bit way to work in the vineyard, to clarify the canopy, to put some shoots away, and everything to clarify, to help to have air going inside the vineyards. But we stopped a few years ago because we get burned in hot weather. It's almost every year. And we have to hide now the grapes under the leaves. Otherwise, we get burned. And so we have, even I move back to this way, just keep the top of the leaves to like an umbrella to protect the grapes, but and put the one on the bottom away. But it's a change. It's crazy in 20 years. You could see that. After, in terms of acidity, Chablis, sure, with it's Chardonnay grapes, so it's not the time to plant other varieties in Chablis. We have time. It won't be my generation and probably not my children also, because now, as I said, we reach a good level of maturity every year. So without chaptalization, without other things. So it's not the time to change or plant other things in Chablis, I think, in my view. After, it's a way of how to manage the acidity level. Acidity level, it's a key for Chablis, one of the key, like for every wine. But when you're thinking about Chablis, you like tension, minerality. Minerality, it's for every wine in the world now. But probably I'm not so objective, but it's starting in Chablis, this minerality. But acidity level, it's also hard to manage. Acidification now, for most of the men, it's the new minerality, tartaric acid. For us, I don't like that, so I prefer to stop some malolactic fermentation. That's on my view now. I will see in the future, but as soon as I could avoid tartaric acid, I will continue that way. But it's a generality in Chablis. People are adding tartaric acid. So it's a big change. Before we had too much, and now it's starting to be a lake. And also it's, in general view on the economic side for Chablis. Hopefully, I don't know if it continue, but we're still in good side of the wine business for Chablis. Not about Bordeaux and compare maybe most of Alsace wine. Chablis still on the good side of the business. Why? Because it's easy. Chablis, it's just Chardonnay grapes, white, dry wine. Everybody knows the name of Chablis, and people have in their mind, Chablis, what is Chablis? It's white, dry wine. Maybe they don't know where is Chablis. Maybe they don't know in Burgundy. But most important, it's come from Chablis. Easy to pronounce everywhere in the world. And probably easy to understand for wine, Petit Chablis, Chablis, Premier Cru, Grand Cru, and that's it. That's probably one of the reasons. Also, the other reason, it's probably the maturity. Now you have more and more good wine. You have always big difference, depending the domain, depending how you manage the wine, of course. But the global quality of Chablis wine is still good. And we have to say thank you to our cooperative, because La Chablisienne is still producing 1/4 of all the production. And I think you could find, of course, in 9 million bottles, they produce different quality of the wine, but the general quality is good. So it's a good front line for us. And also maturity and also Chablis, we're still exporting. I think the last number is 60%, and it's always one of the reasons. It's we have domain, like I named my grandfather, but the Moreau family, La Roche or William Febvre or Drouin, travel a lot during the 60s, 70s, and to promote Chablis wine, and they always find people who travel a lot to do the promotion, and also I think it's one of the key of our success. The problem is for me now is people are like that. So they have to move away to travel more than because some people it's a bit too easy for Chablis. Even if you produce wine with lots of volume, you could sell the wine in bulk, whatever, in good price, very good price. in too good price, in my view. You could sell the wine in bottle, and every quality is selling. And I hope, and I think people don't see what's going on around, because people, the good volume, the good big markets like UK for the Chablis and Petit Chablis, it's slowing down step by step, it's slowing down. And I think people don't see, have to move around to travel more and to see what's going on around and to see more what's reality, people drinking less wine. And because our syndicates in Chablis are always want more volume, more rendement, extend more vineyard in plantation, and more, I think we go in the wall. We are not in the wall in Chablis. We are really well protected, sure, so far, but I'm not so optimistic for the future. It's fine. And also one of the problems of Chablis, you have less and less small domain. People, you have more and more domain or more people outside from Chablis. We have always people outside from Chablis at vineyard here, like from Beaune or Longue de Paquis. But there is more and more, and they always want to increase the size of the domain, and so they're buying more and more small estates. There is lots of people are getting in retard, and don't want, and they sell the domain. There's just a new sale of 10 hectares a few weeks ago, and yeah, I'm not a big fan of that.
Just another minute or two, please, Fabien.
Yeah, and just about the vintage 25, that's a good example of what's going on in the climate change also, because good things, we don't have any frost, anything, no complaint, it's rare, until the 18th of August. So everything was nice, perfect. But from the 18th of August to last week, we finished the last Wednesday, we have 100 millimeters of rain. And in one day, we had 70 millimeters of rain around the 23 of August. And it changed the grapes like that. Before, it was not ripe. And so people, as soon we had the 70 millimeters up, we had the first sign of rot. And after in Chablis, it was a rush to the machine harvest. So during 4 days, people, it was a big rush. We're going to lose yield, because 24 was a disaster in Chablis, okay? So it was a rush, so pick everything, but for me it was not ripe. So they harvest everything, and after, for us, we started the week after, and it was fine during 1 day, and last Sunday, boom, the grapes changed a lot. So for us, we finished the 3 last day. Most of the grapes were velvet with botrytis, so we unpick and we sort the grapes, but it's changed like that. So it's crazy how it changed. We were in a perfect way for everything, and in 4 days it changed everything. So so the way it's the way it is. Yeah, we have to adapt ourselves and the vines, and also how we are thinking to the future and how we think in the future of our lives.
Fabien, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinary and privileged opportunity to listen to the three of you with different aspects from each of you. You have managed to so impress our listeners that they've not come up with any questions at all, which is probably the first time ever. There's been so much information. Olivier, may I ask you, do you think the appellation system itself will have to change to adapt to the challenge of climate change and changing styles?
Yes, an appellation is not something which is rigid and fixed. It takes a long time to change, because in the principle, you do not do a promise for the future. You don't say, if you allow me to do this, I promise you I will do this in the future. You have to show that it works, and then you are granted the right to change something. That's a lot of things people don't realize this. So if we, for example, we want to have a new grape variety, I don't know, Vermentino, Syrah, Sangiovese, whatever, we have to go into the free space of the Vin de France, like Lafleur is doing now, plant some Syrah, whatever, make some wine for 10 years, show that many growers are doing it, are interested, show the wine, show that they are of good quality, and respect the characteristic that people would think of an Alsace wine. And then it moved on like that. So it's a very lengthy process, and you take a lot of risk, because today a lot of people are angry about the appellation, but I can guarantee you something. If you don't write Bordeaux on a bottle of wine, if you don't write Chablis on a bottle of wine, if you don't write Alsace on a bottle of wine, you end up in that huge sea of unknown wines, which are not very highly sold at good prices. You know, I see it with a lot of friends because they wanted to change something. They were not happy about something about their region, whether it's irrigation, new grape varieties, or being fed up by the restriction of some categories of wines, like these new rules being produced in the Loire Valley, for example. As you know, some people go in Vin de France and they realize they don't sell the wines anymore, because all of a sudden you lose the identity of the wine. So it's a complicated situation. But the pressure today, because of the drama in some wine region, and no French wine region is exempt of that, and even Burgundy will have some issues in the future also. Things are moving faster. You know, we can see from the INAO, who probably actually will be bankrupt by the end of the year also. That people don't realize that, but they are out of funding. The French government give them much less money nowadays. They are not even capable to pay the rent of their offices in Paris anymore. It's a fact. So things are going to change much faster in our country. You're talking about irrigation and Lafleur going into Vin de France. It's a very bold move. I'm not talking whether, if you want to irrigate, you have to realize why you do it and what are the consequences. And I hope that they studied extremely well their decision. But also, people forget an appellation in France is a communal brand. It's something shared by all the wine growers. The more people go out of it, the more the appellation falls down and becomes less valuable. You know, so people have to think twice before doing this. Yeah.
Thank you ever so much. I would love to carry on asking my own questions, but I know that we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank the three of you most warmly for an absolutely fabulous, stimulating hour. And Andrea, over to you to formally finish us.
Thank you very much, Helen. And yes, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, Olivier, Gavin and Fabien. Thank you very much for your time. We're very privileged to have you with us today and presenting to everybody. Thank you to our members and non-members for attending. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like to join our next session, which is on the 7th of October, we'll be joined by Tim Hanney, MW, and he's going to be looking through the looking glass, the perceptual individualism and rethinking of wine and food, understanding the sensory perceptions that are not unique. So, or they are unique, should I say, to each people's. So please do join us then. And thank you once again, gentlemen, and thank you, everybody. Goodbye. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.